Welcome, everyone. My name is Laura Roldan. I am a student, a PhD student on my third year, at the University of Exeter in England. And my research is on conflict and the environment. And I'm doing social networks to try and pair those two worlds together. So this space, this activity belongs to the initiative of the early and middle career researchers who are studying social network analysis or network analysis in general. So briefly, we are a nonprofit professional association, and we got launched in 2022, although Francisca and Chiara have been working since 2021. This space is for all of you who think they are on their early and middle career research path. And what we want to do with this space is basically to be able to connect and to stimulate the research and the study of network analysis in many applications around the world, and to make it visible, to make that research visible, and to create this little community, or big community now, of people who are sort of new to the field. So as part of this initiative, we planned a series of workshops like this one. We had 2 weeks ago, which you can see on the YouTube channel. This is going to be recorded and it's going to be on YouTube as well. I'm going to explain the whole agenda briefly. But we want just to create conversations. We want to create ways to have new friends, new collaborators, new co-authors, new people to ask, or just people to find some support. So welcome to this space. On the chat, I believe that you can see that I've put the Twitter account as well as the Google website that we have created for you. It's open for discussion and collaboration as well, so please feel free to send your comments through. So for today, we have a lovely set of panelists who are going to share with us advice on how to survive your PhD and then what to do next. So I will ask the panelists to introduce themselves and just talk briefly about the 3 key things that they think saved their lives throughout their PhD. And then we're going to start to dive into the topics that were circulated on the invitation. We will do that for an hour and maybe 10 minutes. And then after that, we're going to stop the recording and we're going to open a safe space for you to ask questions if you want to. If there are no questions, we'll just chat for a few minutes and then that will be it. It will be time to say goodbye. So remember that it's being recorded. Please feel free to interrupt as and when you want to, and to ask questions, of course, or just to comment and to participate freely. So I am going to start with Miranda. Can you please introduce yourself and give us your 3 key pieces of advice?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me as well. So I am Miranda Lubbers. I did my PhD in Groningen in the Netherlands on school networks, actually. And then I did 4 postdocs, actually. So 1 in the Netherlands, and then I went to Spain because my husband's from Spain. And then after that, I became an associate professor and now a full professor in anthropology. So, and now I do research in personal networks on as related to social inclusion and cohesion. And so, well, 3 pieces of advice. One is, I'm sort of a broken record in this, start writing early on. So I just said that to 2 of you yesterday, but start writing early on, because writing is actually thinking as well, right? So if you write, it's when you become better aware of the faults in your thinking as well. So don't do it at the end of your analysis, but do it early on, right? And train it as well. It's sort of a muscle that you need to train and that you need to practice, and you need to protect your writing time. So the second is have also long-term goals. So it's very easy to be, to say, well, I need to get this paper done, or I need to go to that conference and so on, these short-term goals. But it's also good to think a little bit from time to time about what you want to do in 10 to 15 years, right? When you, you're not as much limited by all kind of practical decisions, but it's more like, what is it that you aspire to, right? And this could also help you make decisions about what you want to do now. So this is, I think, is very helpful. And the third one is knowing the signs of getting overworked as well. One of which is that if you are structurally working too many hours and you notice that you become angry or sad much more than normal, then that's usually, then you're on your path, right, to having a burnout, for example. And if that happens, then lower your stress, right? Don't wait with that. We tend to think always that something will go terribly wrong if we, wait for a week with the rest of the work, if we take a week off. But actually nothing happens, right? The work is always waiting for us, which is bad also, but okay. And sometimes it's better to pause for a week and then get on than to get to a situation where it's much harder to recover from. So those are my 3 pieces of advice.
Thank you. Chiara?
Yeah, so well, hi everybody, and thank you for having me. My name is Chiara Broccatelli. I'm also from the University Autonomous of Barcelona. Now I can say I've literally just started, and so I did my PhD at the University of Manchester, the Mitchell Centre. Then I moved to University of Glasgow, and I did 1 postdoc there. I'm going to tell you that this is my third postdoc, only because Miranda said that she also did you. And then I want to normalize the fact that, we are all doing a lot of postdocs. So thank you for saying this, Miranda. For me, it was very, very nice to hear. And so I was in Glasgow a little bit, then at the University of Glasgow, then I was doing a visiting at the University of Melbourne, and then I decided to stick a little bit around in Australia, and then I just went to University of Queensland in Brisbane. And I stayed there throughout the pandemic, and it was a wonderful experience in Queensland, so I'm very happy with that. And now I'm a Marie Curie Research Fellow at the University of Barcelona, Autonomous. So I've been thinking about what to say, like my 3 things, and I think I have like 2, because one is actually 2 things. But I think for me, it really made a difference to have a shift of mindset at some point when I realized that I didn't need to take anything personally. So when I was receiving like a suggestion or like an idea, okay, my writing, or maybe you should add something here, something there. I think I started at the beginning, I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, why they asked me to do that? But then everything changed when I started to look at this with different eyes. So this is an opportunity for me to be creative and to, to say, okay, this is something that I didn't think of it. How can I incorporate this idea while also keeping what I was thinking together? So rather than looking into something like, I have to change it, I have to redo it. It was more like thinking in terms of, okay, how can I make it differently in a more creative way? So that really helped me not to take things personally and just to be more optimistic. And then the second thing was to realize that I wanted to be independent. And what does it mean be independent? It means for me that I have to be providing some solutions, right? So I don't expect people to come to me and during my supervisor not come to them and say, hey, I have that problem. It was more like, I have this problem and those are my solutions. And what do you think about my solutions? And this is something that I'm always telling my students because, it's very good to have a very clear ideas of which are your expectations, what your expectations and what your supervisor expectations are as well. So this is always something that I always tell my students. Okay, and the last things, having friends outside academia, hanging out, never always go out on Friday nights and drink with your friends outside academia. I think those are my 3 things.
Thank you. Xinwei?
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Laura and Francisca, for the invitation. I'm super happy to be here to kind of contributing to this earlier and mid-career panel. So my name is Xinwei Xu. So I was trained as a sociologist. So I had a PhD from Cornell, and then I moved. So kind of during my dissertation years, I was also a visiting researcher at the University of Cologne for almost a year and a half, and that was kind of during the pandemic. And then right now I'm a postdoc researcher at ETH Zurich at the Social Network Lab. So the 3 things that were key during my PhD, I think maybe some of those already kind of echo what Chiara and Miranda already said. So I feel like the first thing that's really helpful for me to have a supportive network or like social support network. I think this can be people from your own cohort or like your friends and your family. So I think that's really like a key factor that really sustained me through like during the last 2 years of my PhD, which is like kind of during the pandemic. And then the second thing maybe relates a little bit to what Chiara just mentioned. Is I feel like it's really, for me personally, I really appreciate that I had a really fantastic mentor. I think it would be ideal that this person would also be your direct doctoral supervisor. But on the other hand, if you feel like that your doctoral supervisor is just crazily busy to like really attend to your emotional needs, I think it can also helpful that you have a network of mentors. I think those can also be people from like just graduate students who are maybe 1 or 2 more years senior than you, or maybe from other faculty members with whom you have taken courses with. So I found that really helpful to kind of navigating through this whole process. And the third thing that actually maybe echoes a little bit with what Miranda just mentioned is just to try to develop the habit of writing regularly. I think like especially for like if you just start your PhD, I can definitely relate that writing can be really hard, and I think it's okay to tell yourself that writing a really, really super crappy first draft is actually a success rather than just like putting off the writing process at all. So I think another thing maybe is also like, I think developing the habit is not necessarily like pressuring yourself to like, I don't know, write 1,000 words every day, right? That's not a really realistic goal. But I think it's also more about you just like show up and just log in the time. Just make sure that you have this time frame that you protected for yourself only for writing. Yeah.
Thank you. George?
Hi all, I'm George Vega. I'm a research assistant professor in epidemiology at the University of Utah. I got my PhD biostatistics from USC, and I also got a master's in economics from Caltech. I'm a weird bug. I went to business school and I'm doing epidemiology course, so who knows how I got here, but I do research and methods development. I'm a methodologist, and I primarily work with exponential family dependent graph models, and nowadays genetics and some agent-based modeling. So what I can tell you about the advice, it's really hard because there's so many things I would like to tell you. But like picking up the top 3, I think that one that has already been mentioned, I think it's you have to put some free time on your schedule, right? So it's not all about work. You have to develop that habit. At some point, I was working like for sure more than 8 hours a day. I don't know, 10, maybe, I don't know how much. But the problem is that I have a family, right? So, and that's not compatible. So even as a academician, we are tempted to keep doing this because we love what we do, right? But you have to put some time, some free time, like I don't know, like a regular work schedule, because that will help you. And if you have a family, it's important as well. The other thing that I wanted to share is that there's no harm in asking, and you have to advocate for yourself. So one thing that I've seen many times in young scholars is that they tend to be afraid of asking for things. And I mean, literally, like, for example, I don't know, asking for a raise, asking for more money when you're getting your job. And nobody's going to advocate. So people's going to advocate for you, but you are the first one who has to do that. So, and that will improve your career. So I've been lucky enough in the sense that people I don't know, every time that I ask for something, it's not every time they will tell you yes, but you have to do it. So you have to forget about like being quote unquote so quiet and not asking for more things if you want more. You have to do that. And one last advice, which I think is very important, is that perfection is not your friend, right? So I've seen many times like people like sitting down trying to write the perfect paragraph in your paper, and you might like spend 2 hours and you wrote like 2 sentences. That's not good. So instead of that, you have to think about like try to do things and get them out and showcase your work and put it out as soon as you can. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. And I think that's always good for academia, because also that will help you create more collaborations. In my case, I also do software development, and whenever I'm like building stuff, I don't wait like for 2 years before I put my things out. I just finish the paper as the best as I can and put it out as soon as I can, because that way I can get feedback and people get to see my work, which is always good for your career. So those will be my advice.
Thank you. And Dominika?
Hi, my name is Dominika Czerniawska. I'm currently a postdoc at Leiden University in the Netherlands, and in my research I focus on scientific networks and scientific collaborations. Now I'm more on the side of big networks and global collaborations like nuclear fusion or brain research, but in the past I also did micro-scale studies of scientific collaborations. My 3 pieces of advice from my PhD is: find the community, find a mentor, and take holiday. And let me walk you through these 3 points in more detail. Community. So my trajectory is slightly different, because I started my PhD at University of Warsaw, and we do have some social network scholars in Warsaw, but not that many, at least not enough to form a community. And during my PhD, I landed in Manchester at the Mitchell Center, where I finally was surrounded by people doing similar research. And it was a breakthrough both mentally and when it comes to research, because it creates this sort of buzz. So if you don't have that where you're currently placed, try to seek this sort of experience, because it makes a lot of difference. Secondly, find a mentor. And when I think about a mentor, I think about a person slightly senior, not a peer, that could listen to you, identify your struggles, be empathetic, and be able to reason with you. And it is a lot about personal connections, and it not necessarily has to be your supervisor. To be honest, I would advise to seek someone outside of your direct hierarchy, because it's easier to become open with a person like that. And I did find someone like that on my trajectory, and I'm trying to also help PhD students in my group and serve as such a, not that I'm trying to, not that I'm aspiring to be someone's mentor, but I'm trying to be open and listen to needs of people slightly junior than I am. And of course, their career does not depend on my opinion, so I feel that they can be open with me. And the third thing is holiday. As many panelists mentioned, is good for your mental health, but I would say that many of my intellectual breakthroughs happen during holiday. Of course, it's different when you have family and children to attend to. But for me, my PhD holidays were about hiking in mountains and just digesting all the stuff I absorbed during my studies. And I came up with many ideas during this trip. So think of it or organize your time in a way that would allow you to accelerate all the knowledge you absorb, because it's very hard to do when you have a computer and when you're writing or have some errands to run. Just go away, and I think that it's fundamental to go away, to leave your office, to leave your town and your city, and go somewhere that that suits your need, and try not to think, and those thoughts will come to you. So these are my 3 pieces of advice.
Thank you. This is very useful. I think you have said all the things that I've been failing at. So just as a recap, I wrote a few words to summarize what you just said, because I think it's very important. So you mentioned being creative, stopping, showing up, asking, not being perfect, not being alone, and giving yourself time to digest. So that I think that can summarize what you just said. Thank you. Great pieces of advice. And I think now we can move on to talk about the field of network analysis, and what your perspective is on, for example, the research trends and the applications. Or you can also talk about the challenges, or you can choose to talk about the methods and tools. So let's do those 3, and then we can talk about then what to do with your PhD and what to, being a PhD means in terms of other things like collaborating, publishing, and then doing something with it in your career. So let's start with the research trends, applications, and challenges. And if you want to discuss something about methods and tools, please feel free to talk about those 3 things. So maybe we can do the reverse order. Dominika, can you start, please?
Yes, now I think that basically we see two trends in network science. So the first one would be all this large database, data mining, and influx of physicists, complex scientists to social networks, and that's one very big trend. And investing time in efforts in this sort of tools and methods makes sense, because it's easier to find a job. And it's obvious, like if you're on job market, and as a postdoc, I'm constantly on the job market looking for jobs. Even like I have a job, but once I got this one, I started looking for a new one, or the next one, not because of the dissatisfaction, it's because of the reality. So that's a safe bet. But if you have a background in sociology or other social sciences, sometimes it might become more challenging, and you have to give yourself more time. Though I am a sociologist by training, and during my PhD, I taught myself how programming, and now I even teach programming. Maybe not to computer scientists, but on a regular basis, I run a course on programming in R. So it can be done, and now we have many tools to help ourselves to acquire this sort of skills. And the second trend we see, especially in social networks, is the reverse trend, and going back to small databases, and in order to understand how those networks are formed on the micro level. Probably other panelists can elaborate on that a bit more, but it seems like even for especially in the field I'm mostly interested in scientific networks, there has been a large push towards this micro networks, and also mixed methods. So how we bring different types of data together, and how we marry this big data set, especially bibliometric data base, with in-depth analysis of other types of networks. Yeah. And just learn programming at least a bit. That's always helpful, even for your daily data struggles. to some extent, and then you will be just more attractive on the job market.
Okay.
So
which programming language do you use?
I use R and SQL, but it's of course I'm not working with text. So if people are interested in text mining, Python would be a tool to use. If you work like with databases, as I do with bibliometric data, SQL is a must. Like you can't get far. Like it always puts you in a situation where you rely on other people, which can be helpful if you want to build collaboration, but then it can hold you back, especially with this basic stuff. So for me, R plus SQL work very well as a combo, but yeah, it depends on your research field.
Okay, thank you, George.
So I think that if that's, I think I can talk a little bit from the research that I'm doing, because allegedly as a faculty member, I am the latest trends and things like that, supposedly. So, and that's the best thing I can say about. So the two things that I can mention, coincided with Dominika, it's small networks. I actually did my dissertation on exponential random graph models for small networks, which I called Ergomiro. And now I've seen that a lot of papers are featuring more and more samples of small networks, which is very interesting. It's something that we didn't have before. We did have egocentric studies now, but for example, this year, Krivitsky and others published a paper on the Journal of American Statistical Association about how to do run multi-level ergoms, featuring many thousands of small networks. I think that's an important trend that is going to take more and more strength because again, so now we do have the capability of collecting many networks, which is something that we didn't have before. So learning how to manage this tool and how to process not one but like multiple graphs, I think it might be useful and an interesting trend to follow. Because yeah, so before we used to, as I don't know, some of my mentors have told me, yeah, so it's usually when you do ergoms, you will think about like you have a single party, you have like a small group, a group of people, and you're analyzing a single party, right? But now it's not that, but actually you have a sample of them. So the possibilities of the things that you can do also grow. And like innovations in that realm might be are still to come. So I think that there's a good space for doing research. And the other that I haven't seen in social networks, but I hope to see, and I think it's very interesting. It's something that's called mechanistic machine learning. So I've seen recently in physics and other natural sciences in which they are trying to leverage machine learning to improve their methods development, like theory. So for instance, there is this paper that in which they want to predict the temperature of the surface of the water. In physics, they do have like methods for that. They do have like a mechanistic model that's based on theory and to that thing, but then you have like neural networks, right? Well, with mechanistic machine learning, you take both approaches and you mix it to get better predictions. That's something that it's very new on the edge. It's a new trend, and I think it's going to be good for us scientists because by using mechanistic machine learning, we can incorporate what we know from theory, right? Because usually you will see that in computer science, in other areas that are more like data exploration, they will just like put the data into the blender and hope for the best. Whereas in this mechanistic machine learning, you can go ahead and use your knowledge as a prior information to enrich your model for better predictions or inferences. And that's fairly new, and I think it's closely related to causal inference and machine learning, which is another trend that is like around those realms. I think those two are the big things I would say that I can see in my area.
Okay, so thank you. So my Zoom got disconnected, but if I got this correctly, you mentioned about multi-level networks with micro data. Yeah, and mechanistic machine learning.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, Xinwei?
Yes. So maybe just to kind of follow up on the previous two panelists mentioned, I think this trend of going into like small data set, especially examples of small data set, I feel like this is also something that I've seen in the past, is also, especially in my area of research, I mostly focus on, in my dissertation, I study like school networks. So basically now we have this amazing cross-national data sets where you have a multiple like school networks, which allows you kind of explore those potential like contextual variation. So that's one thing, like the multi-level network analysis. But I think another thing that I've seen like in those smallish network data set is also like now we have more capacity to collect detailed information on multiple types of relationships, right? So I think now I feel like on the modeling side, you are also having this trend of like co-evolution of behaviors and networks on the one hand, also like the co-evolution of multiple different networks. So it's really explored this like multiple layers of interdependencies between networks and also between networks and behaviors. So I think that's one thing I would like to add on to what the previous two panelists have mentioned. So another thing, I think maybe something that Dominika just mentioned, like this availability of like large novel data sets. I think there's also kind of with the influx of like network scientists, especially from physicists and other disciplines, and I think we are kind of also have a gap between these two research communities. I feel like especially social scientists, we're really like obsessed with like this causal inference framework, right? We really want to understand the causal mechanism, the causal processes. Therefore, I think there are models that cater towards this inference framework that's also catered towards the kind of data set that we're using, those like small level, sometimes multi-level network data sets, such as Oregon and Siena. But on the other hand, I think those kind of methods, they kind of impose themselves some constraints because they're kind of computationally expensive. Therefore, I think there could be some issue thinking about how we kind of scale up those kind of models. And also on the other side, we have this increasing large data set that's coming from like digital traces or like population level register data. I think those kind of open new avenues for like explore, like aggregate populational level network patterns. But on the other hand, there's a lack of like causal reasoning there. So I kind of see there's a kind of gap between those like big data science or big data network science community and what the social science network study community are interested in. So I think there's this gap I would be interested to kind of see any like follow-up work to kind of fill in this gap.
Thank you. Chiara?
Yes, so I think just very quickly following up on that, I think that in the network analysis has been slowly coming into epidemiology. I mean, slowly, it depends from the point of view, but yeah, within the epidemiology and population health. But I do really think that now it's coming also into healthcare, so integrated care systems, and slowly it's becoming very, very popular within the health practitioners. So I've been working with the Queensland Health, with the Children Health of Queensland, and all the time. So one of the trends that I see is also this idea of applying network analysis within a multi-level, using a multi-level framework, but with the purpose of developing network interventions as well. So what I'm saying is like, of course, there is a trend in developing the methodology and the tools, the analytical tools to understand these healthcare systems within this multi-level framework, but also the idea of developing theories and going back to the social network analysis theoretical tool to actually understand the system within this multi-level framework. So, and I think this is very appealing because this is also what can lead to developing network interventions as well. And with this, there is also a huge discussion with this idea of thinking in terms of network outcomes, network effects. network effectiveness as well, and how to measure those. So I think this is what I'm thinking that is going to be very popular. And related to that, and then I'm going to finish, there is this idea of developing a multidisciplinary research team, which is also related with the fact that then we, as a network scientist, we need to become able to talk with people from other disciplines. And this is extremely difficult because I've been, working with epidemiologists, and I have to say that has been extremely challenging sometimes. So learning how to create a dialogue and how to propose something from the network perspective and how to work together, it's also something that has to be developed. And that's what I see that is like becoming very popular. That's for me.
Thank you. And Miranda?
Yes, I think that the others have indicated already these two topics, right? The big data and the thick data. And I definitely also agree with that it's both are, of course, developing sort of independently, but also there is a need for more integration between the two, right? So in the big data analysis, for example, in social network analysis, sometimes we sort of lack the tools to look at, for example, nonlinear dynamics or hypergraphs or stuff like that. And on the other hand, in the network science, sometimes there's a lack of the theories, right, of network theories and the background for these kind of theories. So I think that from both sides we can sort of, get together and also, for example, the things that are being investigated in network science, like cascading or nonlinear disruptions of networks and so on, we can also actually investigate them qualitatively, right? We can actually understand how people experience those kind of changes in their networks and when they appear and how they mobilize their networks and how they live in them, right? And how they are constrained by them and how they build and burn their network. So I think that it's also interesting to sort of take concepts from the other side and then work on them in a, for example, in a qualitative way. And it is true that it's difficult to be working. We also have an interdisciplinary team, and some are like really quantitative or computational, and others are really qualitative. And it's sometimes, of course, difficult for people to understand each other. Two of them are here as well, so they could tell for themselves as well. But so it's sometimes, challenging if we read papers, and sometimes, it's difficult for some or the other group to understand what is going on or to actually appreciate the text, right? But it is also very enriching, I think, and it's what network science is. That's true. It's also, I think, it's also a challenge not only in the way of being able to communicate to each other, but also so when afterward you are, for example, applying for tenure or for postdocs and so on, sometimes you have to apply to disciplinary departments like sociology or something. And then as a network scientist, you might not be seen as an entirely, having the background of sociology. So it is also important to sort of keep connected to your discipline, if that's what you want to do, right, in 15 years. To sort of not lose touch with your discipline, go to the conferences of your discipline and practice your narrative of how what you do relates still to your discipline. I think that's important.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a very quick summary, and I'm going to leave a lot behind, but just like to sort of wrap up this section, you mentioned like big ideas. One of them is the integration. So integration between disciplines. It seems like social network analysis is still growing, and it's sort of swallowing other disciplines. And of course, this is creating a gap, a communication gap, and also methods gap. So you mentioned that. You mentioned the need to integrate qualitative research. And you also mentioned the need to get better at programming and being able to sort of at least get the gist of what programming is doing for the analysis of networks and the analysis of these big data networks. I did find it interesting that you also mentioned that small networks is still a big thing. It's not being all completely overshadowed by big data, but there's still the interest in small networks. And I also liked what Miranda just said about like social scientists lacking the tools to understand in a non-linear way, and other scientists like lacking the theories. So a big like opportunity to work together, like a big argument to work together with other disciplines. So great. Before we go on to the other section, I would like two things. First of all, just make a brief pause in case somebody wants to ask a question. You can also use the chat if you don't want to talk. Maybe get recorded. So please use the chat or just wave. And the other thing that I wanted just to go do a brief round about the methods and tools that you're using. So Dominika, you mentioned that you were using R and SQL. Maybe you can also mention the method that you're using, or a method that you find interesting and maybe you're obsessed about right now. In my case, it's relational event models.
In my case, it's the same. So
relational event models. Okay.
Yes. That's something. Maybe obsession is not a word I would use, because I'm trying not to be consumed by my work. But yeah, I'm exploring relational event models, and what I would like to do. What I was planning to do this year, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen now. It's agent-based model for large data sets. So yeah, these are two things I would like to explore in the forthcoming future.
Okay, and what package are you using? I guess relevant or not?
You can learn a package for RAM, and yeah, I just follow. I attended his workshops and I follow his tutorial how to do it.
It's great to know that at your level you still follow tutorials. It's not just us.
Yeah. In Ljubljana, I was surprised by the composition of the group, how and the fact that even very much experienced network scientists did attend the workshop. So I don't think this community is. I think that this community is built around the idea of constant learning, and you would find professors attending workshops at network science conferences. So that's a regular. I think that's a normal thing to do.
Okay, great, thank you. George, what sort of method would you like to highlight?
Yeah, so on my side, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a methodologist, so I kind of like use my own methods a little bit. I'm working on developing methods, but that said, I am working with the agent-based models a lot, and I'm very interested in graphical models in general. So, but when it comes again, so when people approach me to do this type of analysis, ask me about like statistical questions, ergoms, it's what I do research and what I use, and then GLMs, right? Generalized linear models, which is always good to know, and the basic tools. And in terms of programming tools and things like that, I am actually using artificial intelligence. I'm using something that's called GitHub Copilot. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's based on ChatGPT, and I love it. So I have my I don't know, you can use RStudio, for example, or Visual Studio Code. And when you're typing your code, this thing will like make you suggestions about, like, I don't know, if you put a comment, oh, I want to compute geodesic distances, and it will like prompt you with the code that you need to do that. It's amazing. I even use it for like writing my papers. When I'm writing presentations on I don't know, on Markdown, for instance, Quarto, which is something that I also use. It will also, I will put something like, I don't know, epidemiology is, and then it will autocomplete actually text for me, not just coding. So I'm using that a lot. And in terms of programming languages, I use C++ and R. Again, so I'm a methods developer, so I tend to work with big data or very computationally heavy things. So I will go ahead and like program them in C++ and then create a wrapper around it for R, so others can use it as well. So those are the things that I do. Yeah, those are what I would recommend.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Xinwei?
For me, I think it's mainly StatNet and Arciana. I think those are the kind of standard network modeling packages, especially you're using empirical network data. And I think maybe in addition to attending tutorials, I think one thing that could also be helpful is I know that, for example, StatNet and Arciana, they also have this user mailing list. So I think it would be super helpful if you also subscribe to the mailing list, and when other users who kind of post a question, you also kind of see the response and see if you have similar questions. I mainly use R and sometimes occasionally Python. And one thing, maybe another thing that I like to highlight is also this R blogger. It's also a newsletter, but occasionally you just receive some like cool R tips that you can try it out. I also find that very helpful.
Thank you. Chiara?
I've been I've been using recently MPNet for multi-level exponential random graph models. And then, yeah, I've used Arciana in the past, but haven't applied for a while. And now I'm also into relational event models. So I think I do have the same materials and tutorials to play a little bit before I can actually use it for analyzing my data. But yeah, MPNet is probably my main method at the moment.
Okay, and Miranda?
Well, I'm always changing a little bit. So I started with also Ergum and Arciana and statistics, and then when I came to anthropology, more qualitative analysis, and tried out also fuzzy set QCA, these kind of things, and now back again a little bit to the quantitative side. I do believe that R is absolutely fundamental if you're into networks. I must say I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. So stemming from the fact that it was actually after my PhD, right, that R became a big thing. So it's difficult for me to keep up. I've also been fighting with ChatGPT, as George said, but haven't really found a way to productively do something with it yet. So, for example, it makes up kind of codes and so on or packages in R that don't exist, right? So I'm still sort of struggling with how to do that well. But yeah, so it's a bit of everything, and I definitely think it's a constant learning process and will always be, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. Now we can start discussing the next set of questions, and these relate more to the way we disseminate and the way we use our PhDs in network analysis. So collaborating, were you able to collaborate? At what point were you able to collaborate? How did you do that? Publishing and disseminating. So it's basically about like tips for publishing, like where to publish. In my case, I don't know where to send my paper, if I should send it to multiple papers, to just one, to one with a good, like a good standing, or maybe start slow and then go up. Talk about conferences as well. Do you like them? I've heard people that don't like them at all. And that creates a lot of anxiety as well. And in terms of career paths, so one obvious career path is academia, but do you have anything for people who don't like academia, or like just to maybe expand a little bit? What do you do with network analysis if you don't want to be an academic? So those three things, if you can talk about them. And I'm going to do the reverse order. So I'm going to start with Miranda.
All right. For collaborations, I think it's good to collaborate. It's one of the fun things of academia to find other people in your area. There's, of course, the bigger collaborations like co-authorships or collaborations in projects. There's also smaller ones like organizing a session together or I don't know, organizing a special issue or participating in a book or whatever, right? And that's also, those are also forms that are interesting to participate in, because they sort of, they are like, they give you opportunity structures, right? That later on they might be like activated for other things. Also, I think it's important for PhD students to sort of network among each other, because later on you will be the full professors and so on. So I mean, you will be in different sites. So it's like we see right here, there are several people from Manchester, right? But right now in different sides of the Europe. So that's kind of interesting as well. With regard to journals, I would never send a paper to different journals at the same time.
Okay.
I don't think that's good practice. And so, yeah, and I would definitely start a little bit on the high end. So maybe not like the top journal of the field, but definitely thinking about your future and the need for example, applying for postdocs and so on is so much easier if you have publications in good journals. And of course, nowadays there is a little bit tendency to go away from the indexation levels and so on, and to look more at the content of the articles. But I still believe that actually people still look at what is the journal and if it has good standing or not, right? So yeah, Social Networks is of course like the flagship journal of the social networks community. Global Networks now also has a network scholar as editor, Zachary Neal. So that might be also an interesting journal for some, and it's also indexed and so on. It's good, yeah, it has a high standing. Network Science, of course, is, I don't know if it's indexed right now, so not sure. It is, yeah, Dominika is saying yes, okay. Yeah. And yes, regarding conferences, I can definitely understand why some people don't like them. And I don't think that anyone is obliged to go to conferences. And there's also sometimes smaller, like seminars or, you know, smaller things. Normally you can find them via the discussion list and so on. Where there's like 20 people, you know, 2 days together, and they are actually also a really nice form of, and more, a little bit less, you know, huge, so to speak, and so it's a little bit more personal. So maybe if you don't like big conferences, you do like these smaller things.
Okay, thank you. Chiara?
Yes. So in terms of finding collaborators and developing collaborations, I haven't done anything during my PhD. I mean, I was trying to survive, and that was it. And then everything is coming, I think, later on. So I think there's already a lot many things to think about it. So I probably wouldn't do so. And to be honest with you, some of the collaborations are like, you know, I still have a very good friends with some of my colleagues from Manchester, some very good friendships. So who knows? One day we can develop something and explore. But then it's during the postdoc that I started to actually develop a little bit more independent and also having my own data. So now I can say, okay, hey, how about we collaborate on that with someone else? But during my PhD, that didn't happen. And in terms of publishing, I think something that really helped me in Australia, it was to link with the librarian. And then because when I have to choose where to publish, the first things is like understand if I have money to choose an open access journal or not. And then linking with the librarian, because within each university there is the librarian, and they're like doing a wonderful job in terms of learning how to do your search and understanding which journal is good for what. So I think for me that made a difference in terms of being able to then choose in which journal I was publishing. And yeah, that's me.
Did you send your work to the librarian? Did you?
No, so what I did was to link with her, to talk to her and say, hey, can you show me what is the system to find all the journals? How can I, some university, they might also have their own list with suggested journals or divided by topic. So they are doing a wonderful job. And also they can tell you how to identify which journal is more appropriate for what, based on the topic, based on ranking, the international rankings. So I was I found the discussion with the librarian extremely helpful. So it was just like a chat, and then eventually a couple of more, but that was useful for me.
Okay, thank you. Xinwei?
Yes, so first, collaborations, I think I would start with my peers, for example, and then my supervisor. But I think it also depends on the requirements of your institute. For example, I think back when I was a PhD student, it was very still like expected that you would be the solo author of your PhD chapters. So back then, I think, so I only like put like single authored work in my own dissertation chapters. But I guess, especially if you're like early on in your PhD career, I feel like it's really, it's really important to think strategically or like more practically about how those collaborations could help you achieve this short-term goal of finishing your PhD dissertation, right? So ideally, I feel like even if you have some collaborations on the side, I think like ideally those collaborations would kind of help you achieve this at least short-term goal of finishing your PhD dissertation. I think back then I had some like side projects going on with my peers, but eventually I think so far only one survived. So yeah, so I think that there can be like a really high like failure rate. Yeah. And then I think with your doctoral supervisors or like with other more senior professors, I think it can be in the form of research assistants. I think this is especially maybe easier if like one professor, he or she has like a project funding and he or she would like to hire some like research help on the project. I think that's another way that you can get into potential collaboration, whereas and you also gain some formal training, research training on the project, but maybe this is not directly related to your own dissertation. So there, again, I think you need to really think about carefully how much time you want to distribute like across different projects. I think about publication. Okay, maybe I think one thing I think Miranda mentioned earlier about like your disciplinary identity. I think one thing that I would like to recommend is also kind of when you think about which journal to publish, you also kind of think about your kind of disciplinary identity, because sometimes I think it's even easier or like maybe it's more meaningful to actually publish your work in a subfield that actually with an audience that's really interested in your substantive contributions rather than just to, I don't know, send to a network science or social network journal where like people, maybe there could be like a mismatched audience who are not necessarily really interested in the substantive part of your work. So I think that could be something to think about along these lines. Yeah, I guess that's all right?
Yes, no, that's perfect. Okay. We haven't discussed a lot about career paths, so maybe if George and Dominika, you want to include that in your answer, if you have answers for that. So George.
Sure. Before I continue, I forgot to mention two things in tools that I think are very important. First, resources. Scientific editors. Well, here I'm not sure if everybody has that, but for instance, in my division, we do have a scientific editor who is a person who is very good at writing, who is not a scientist, and that's a great resource. So you can hand this person your paper or your grant or whatever to read it. It's been super useful for me. So, and the other thing is that since everybody mentioned ergoms and CNLs and that kind of stuff. Markup Team Monte Carlo is a tool that you need to know if you are into those methods. I forgot to mention you. And there's a like awesome resource in the handbook of MCMC. The first two chapters are terrific for if you want to get started with it. That's a brief parenthesis I wanted to share. Sure, I can briefly go through the dissemination, publishing, and collaboration, and then talk about career paths. So for dissemination, one thing that I use, which it's also a tool, it's GitHub. I put all my work, my software, my papers on GitHub, this open repository, which is awesome also if you think about career paths, because eventually if you go to industry, for instance, they value that. And in academia, they value that because it's open source and you can like put your research out. So that's good. I also use preprints. I think those are really good resources, right? So you just need to make sure that whatever you're planning to send your paper, they do have a policy in which you can put the paper on a preprint, like an archive or SOC archive or bioarchive, whatever. In terms of conferences, I think that obviously the Sunbelt, it's an awesome conference. IC2S2, the International Conference of Computational Social Sciences, that's another one. NetSci, I went to those three and I have enjoyed them like so much, and I've even got collaborators from there. So attending to these conferences, I've been able to like connect with people, and I've got a couple of papers out from those conferences, like connecting with people in other fields. And that's another thing important, right? So I enjoy very much going to talks of like areas that I'm not an expert in, of course. So I don't know, I might go to biology talks or I don't know, any other area, because sometimes you will find people who is like addressing a different problem than what you're doing, but they have similar data, and then you will have like a space maybe for collaboration or for like stealing the idea. And I think that's a great way of like doing research. In terms of and journals, of course, besides the ones that have been already mentioned, I would like to mention again, I'm a software developer. So the Journal of Open Source Software is amazing because it's super fast. You can get a paper with it, which is 2 pages long. You can read the details about that later on, but it's indexed, and then the publication process is about 2 months, like from when they review it to when you get it published. It's awesome. And connections, of course. I think nobody mentioned connections, which is a great resource from INSNET. Okay, so that's that. And about career paths, yeah. So I always have had like a plan of what things that I like to do, but it's never like a kind of like a hard plan to say in some fashion. And why do I mean with that? In the sense that I'm always open to the possibilities. So I'm in academia right now, but I'm completely open to go to industry. And in that regard, I tend to whatever I'm doing, I'm always thinking in the broad sense, in the sense that, for example, if I'm writing a paper or doing some research, I'm always thinking about how else can I use this eventually. I don't know if that makes sense, but but for instance, a lot of the skills that you get in as a scholar may be good for academia. So and at the same time, I want to say that it's unfortunately many times like people don't see in industry as a valid career path, which is, I think it's completely fine. If you are not in academia, you can still do great science outside of it, or not, right? So right now, I want to say that in many cases, the coolest research it's going on in industry, not in academia. This is like for example, like machine learning and things like that. They are like doing awesome things. And I believe that people who know theory, if you come from a PhD, you can add value to that. So I would like suggest people to be like have their minds open to the possibilities and not just focus on get the tenure track position, because that's not the only way to do science or do something that matters.
Thank you. And Dominika?
Okay, I will add briefly on publishing, and I still do struggle how to place my papers, and I do believe that it's supervisor responsibility to help you with that. And if they fail to do that, they are failing you, and that's my strong conviction that that's one of the most crucial responsibilities of supervisors to help you to indicate where to go. On collaboration during PhD, if you engage in collaboration, either start small and do something really small, not time consuming, or if you're invited to collaboration, don't engage too much into this organizational side, because it's time consuming. And if you're doing that for the first time, it's just so much time. So rather learn and observe and undertake some tasks. You can learn a lot, but be smart of what sort of responsibilities you're undertaking. And for the career paths, brutal reality is that I think that 1 in 3 postdocs will end up with tenure track positions. And even if your heart is set on academia, it might not happen to you, and it's getting more and more difficult. So that's on the sad side of stuff. But on the happy side is that you might enjoy not working in academia more than work in academia. But we don't know. We usually don't know how enjoyable this work can be. And in many countries and in many systems, you would have opportunities to try, like placements. I know that in the UK, you can take some time off, and in the Netherlands as well, you can take some time off and try whether you enjoy industry or public sector more than academia. And there are extremely fruitful careers beyond academia. And once I attended a workshop on life beyond academia, and this person who decided not to pursue career in academia said, like, when we are in academia, we always think that, oh, what is going to happen when I leave academia? But in fact, the reality is that academia is that small, and that's the reality. So when you leave, you have much more opportunity. Most of the jobs are beyond academia, and they can be research and interesting and more fitted to your preferences than the one in academia. So stay open and explore when you have time. So I think that PhD and postdocs are the time to do it, and I try to stay open-minded about it. Yeah, and there is no stigma about the fact that you're leaving academia. It's absolutely fine, and there is I think that we should underline it over and over again. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all your advice. You've given us, or at least me, a lot. Francisca, I'm going to ask you not to, because I want to include 2 questions. It says here that my internet connection is unstable. It's been a mess. So do tell me if you're not listening to me.
We lost you like for 30 seconds.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to repeat that. It's almost time to stop the recording and open the room for questions. But before we do that, I just want to include 2 questions. And given the nature of the questions, I want the panelists to volunteer their answers. So one of them is regarding the emotional aspect. I know you've mentioned a lot about taking breaks, etc., but I would like you to dig deeper if you can. So I have struggled a lot with my mental and emotional health. It was a surprise to me. When I came into the PhD, everyone was telling me like how hard it is, and you know how hard it is. And I was like, yeah, you have to read a lot, and difficult subjects. And it surprised me that the most difficult part is just dealing with your thoughts about being enough, about doing the right thing, about not looking stupid all the time, all the single time, brushing your teeth, you're doing it wrong. It became so overwhelming, and I've received a lot of help. But I would like to know your thoughts about your struggles, if that's okay. And if you want to, please raise your hand. If not, big silence will tell me to move on. Okay, well, Miranda, and then George, and then Xinwei.
I think that it's that the mental health issues are not just a thing among PhD students. It's a thing in academia, and it's very widespread. And I think that you have to also be aware that you're definitely not alone in this. Then right, and you can talk with other people about it, because there's no one in academia, I guess, that who doesn't know that it can be tough, right? So I've had a burnout when I was in my first postdoc of all the postdocs. And so, yeah, it's something that is really, it's something that I don't recommend to get, right? Because it takes a lot of time to get over it and so on. And also the thing of imposter syndrome, for example, is something that we have a lot, right? Especially if you're not, yeah, if you have sort of internalized a societal discourse on who belongs to academia and who doesn't, and this is so sad, actually, right? So I think that it's important to also say this, that if you don't look like the typical person in academia, if you have a different ethnic background or race or social class or sexual orientation or whatever, then it is so important that you are in academia, because of course the interests and the assumptions also of researchers, they influence their research, right? So if it's always like white male, certain middle higher class people who are in academia, then it's their interests and assumptions that feed into the research. I think it is absolutely important that people that have different sort of backgrounds are in academia. It's really important for science to be diverse. And so you don't just belong, you belong, you know, it is important that you're there. And that's definitely what I wanted to add here.
Thank you. George?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning before, like the free time, it's important, and also learn when to say no, because like becoming overburdened, it's very easy, especially once you get your PhD and you start like more like a postdoc, like a faculty position. It's like you have to learn. And I think anytime you have to learn when to say no, right? So you can't do everything. There may be people who can, but I can't. And in that sense, so that's really important. And also again, so taking some time off, being able to allocate free time to enjoy with my family. I do struggle with depression, and for me that was very important. And when that happened, when it first came, looking for help. It's very important. At least what I've seen here in the U.S. and in my home country in Chile, like mental health issues it's like so much stigma. So people don't go to psychiatrists or psychologists, and I don't know why. So you should go like every year, just like you take your car, just like you go and take your like a flu shot or whatever. You have to take care of your mental health, and it's important. And I'm being open with it because also for me it's been great being like that. I do have this experience when I was teaching a class, and I shared this. The instance came, and I currently shared this with my students. And after class, one of my students like came to me for asking me for help, because he was struggling with something and he needed help. And since he saw me, he saw himself and myself, I guess, something like that. He came to me with trust and asked me for help. And I think that was so, I felt so good about myself. And I think it's important to be open about it, and it's important that you allocate some time for yourself and take care of yourself, which is sometimes like people don't tell you that. That's key.
Thank you. Xinwei?
Yeah, so maybe one thing to add on to what George just mentioned about learn to say no and learn to say stop. I think like another thing good to keep in mind is that when you say no and when you say stop, the world still keeps going, right? The world is not gonna stop. Nothing's gonna break if you just say no, I'm gonna take a break. So just it's fine. Yeah, so I think another thing that I found really helpful during my PhD, especially I'm kind of have those like emotional kind of breakdown or like moments of like really anxiety or like huge pressure, I try to learn, like treat this process of learning better about myself, or like try to, like, you can't just imagine like you are also being in a relationship with yourself, right? And you try to have a better relationship with yourself as well. So you can just treat yourself as if you would treat your best friend, right? So yeah, just to keep that in mind, that yeah, you need to prioritize yourself, you need to prioritize your well-being. And maybe another thing I think Dominika just mentioned, like, it's also good to keep things in perspective. Like academia is only like one tiny dot on the whole like sea of possibilities of things you can do, right? So I think even if you for some reason don't make it, then that's fine. There are other like opportunities that are waiting for you. So I think, yeah, so just like keep things in perspective. Yeah, that's something that I found really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
May I just add, yes, may I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Finding the value of yourself beyond academia is crucial. And of course, it helps that to have someone that would hold your hand during this process. But this sort of, and I think that's the cause why academia can be so toxic, because we still see being a scholar as a calling. And it's not a calling. Like, many of us probably read Max Weber piece, Calling or a Vocation. It's even a profession. And we are humans, whether valued humans, whether we succeed or in academia or not. And yeah, and that's something, when I came to this illumination, and it was quite late in my career, it was a relief. And being kind to people pays back. If you're kind to people, people would be kind to you, and not necessarily your competitors or your supervisors. Just people, your peers, and sharing kind word, it will come back to you in a kind word shared with you about yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. We will make sure to create a new environment, the early and middle career researchers, for newcomers in a more gentle, kind, and flexible environment. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we can move on to the Q&A. We have a few minutes and we have a few questions. So maybe, Francisca, you can stop recording now.